this is Quinlan, and today I'm at Kokusekiji Temple in Oshu City, Iwate. This temple hosted one of my favorite festivals in all of Japan. I'm saying that in the past tense because the Kokusekiji Sominsai, a festival that was held yearly for more than 1,000 years, was held for the last time this year in 2024. In this video, I'd like to explain what this festival was all about, the history, what goes on during it, and why it, in the end, had to be canceled, at least in its present form. And then I'd also like to explain about other festivals in the area, which are also pretty fantastic. Let me start out with the story behind the Sominsai festival. It was said that there were two brothers living in this area in northern Japan. They were Somin Shorai, the older brother, and Kotan Shorai, the younger brother. Now, this younger brother was very successful. He was said to own several different buildings. He had a whole farming enterprise going, and he was doing very well for himself. The older brother, on the other hand, Somin Shorai, was poor and lived in a little shack and basically did subsistence farming, and he was just scratching by. Now, one day, a Japanese divinity, the god Susanoo, or a Buddhist divinity, Hitaki Noori, or the medicine Buddha, was disguised in human form traveling across the area. This divinity, whether Buddhist or Shinto, initially visited the rich younger brother and asked them if they might spend the night in their house. The younger brother, though he had houses by the dozen, according to the story, turned away the poor beggar. The older brother, on the other hand, Somin Shorai, welcomed this ragged beggar, actually divine, into his house and fed him some millet and whatever simple food he had and let him sleep close to the hearth and stay warm. He didn't have much, but he hosted him to the best of his ability. Then a few years later, the divinity returned and revealed himself to Somin Shorai. He warned that a disaster was coming and instructed him to put a sacred rope around his waist and the waists of his immediate family members. Somin Shorai followed the instructions, and when everything around him was blighted and destroyed, just he and his family survived. The divinity then promised that he would protect the descendants of Somin Shorai from future disasters if they would follow this formula and chant that they had descended from him. That's the origin story. This is in an ancient Japanese text from more than 1,000 years ago. And based on this, a festival was held in this region and continued to be held until this year. The festival, however, is a lot more exciting and dramatic even than this story. First, let me tell you about the temple itself. The Kokusekiji Temple, Myo Kenzan, as it's called, actually is incredibly ancient. It dates back to the year 729. That's right, it's nearly 1,300 years old, though the building that I'm right in front of here, the main temple hall, was actually built in 1874, I believe. And the reason being, as with most temples in Japan, there have been multiple fires. I mean, this is out in the mountains, there's forest fires, there's battles, and so this temple has burned down a number of times. And the current structure is, yeah, like about 140-ish years old. But it's so old that one of the early times it was burned down was when Japan wasn't even occupying all of this island yet. And this area was inhabited by the Emishi, those lost tribes of the north. And the Central Empire sent up the great general, Sakanoi Tomoromaro, to absorb them, conquer them, bring them into the empire. And so that's how old this temple is. At least this location, if not the building itself. It's almost a ship of Theseus situation. The temple is still the temple, even if it's not the original wood, right? This area that I am right now, on that night of the festival every year, is packed with people. It is hundreds of people assemble on this temple. In some cases, there's hundreds of participants even. And it is just intense. There are 5 main sections to the festival, and I'm going to take you through those sections now. The first part of the festival is simply the Hadaka Mairi, or sort of the naked prayer, I guess. If you translate it literally, there's a few different ways you can translate that, but that's one. And basically the participants, which are dozens and sometimes more than 100, will be wearing only white loincloths, fundoshi in Japanese, and little tabi sort of socks, jikatabi in a lot of cases. And they then come down to this river that I'm walking right down to here. Probably hear it right now, actually. But yeah, right here. This area of river right behind me here. This is where they come. And this exact location right here on the night of the festival just is packed with people. There are 4 or 5 men often at the same time in this cold water on a February night, taking these big buckets and dumping water over their heads while chanting "Jasso Joyasa, Jasso Joyasa," which is sort of warding off evil and bringing in good fortune. After that, then these soaking wet and probably, well, certainly very cold guys will go up to that central temple area and pray. After the Hadakamairi is the Hitaki Noori, which is sort of like climbing up the pyre or climbing up the bonfire. And this is often held close to 11:30 or midnight because the festival is beginning after 10 p.m. at night and running usually until 8 a.m. the next morning. This very last festival that was held in 2024 was abbreviated and just went from 6 in the evening till 11 in the evening, but for 1,000 years it was something that started late at night and went overnight until the next morning. I have photos from previous years of this, and 4 or 5 guys will often be climbing up on top of this huge 2-meter high pyre at once. And that usually is right in this area right here. And they are singing a traditional folk song as they do it. And it's a pyre, I say, but it's more of a smoldering fire, and so they're not necessarily getting burned, though there are sparks flying. But what you do see is just so much smoke. And yeah, they stay for as long as they can hack it on top of this huge pyre with smoke just billowing around them as they try and sing. They're holding wooden sticks and lanterns, and eventually they'll jump down, other people will jump up, and the dozens or more than 100 participants will all have their turn on top of this pyre. After that is the Betto Nobori, which is when the head priest or the head monk of this temple is brought up carrying this sacred bag called the Somin Bukuro, and he is escorted up. It's almost like they're carrying him in a way, and he brings the sacred bag up to the temple and then begins performing some rituals. He lights a fire, he's chanting, I think, a sutra of some sort. It's a sort of long service, and you're forbidden to take photos or videotape it. I was here last month during the very last of this 1,000-year festival, and other people were yelling at the cameramen to turn off their cameras during this part because it is, of course, a religious tradition. This is a ritual. It's a festival and it's an exciting community thing, but at its core, this is a ritual with divine sacred meaning to Buddhism. Then the third section is called Onigo Nobori. And in this, 2 7-year-old children are dressed traditionally, and they have demon masks upside down on their backs. And then they're given a piggyback ride by 2 other men who then take them up to the temple, carrying them on their backs, as I said, and they circle a fire that's right there on the temple steps 3 times. And this is an incredibly packed area, and it's amazing that they take the risk of having open flame right there with so many people so close. I do have some video footage of this from last month. Check this out. Then the last part is the battle for the Somin Bukuro. As you may remember, Somin Shourai was the name of the poor older brother who hosted the medicine Buddha, or the god Susanoo. And This bag bears his name, and they put these wooden talismans, which are all individually hand-painted in this bag, and it goes in the center of all of these participants who are all wearing nothing but these white loincloths, and they all are struggling to take hold of it and grab it and run down to the entrance of the temple. It's a little more complicated than just that. I know that partway through they take a knife and they slit open the bag and start bringing out these wooden talismans, which individual people then grab. They throw some to the audience, and of course they're said to bring great health, good fortune, things like that. And in the end, they're fighting over an empty bag, which is then vitally important. The person who ends up winning that competition, they always announce who it is, they're said to have an incredible year, be free of sickness, have great fortune, all the good stuff. A huge amount of work goes into this festival, a lot of which is so behind the scenes that you would never know if you weren't told. For example, the preparations for this festival start more than 2 months before the actual festival, when the local families who live right around the temple go up into the mountains, cut down some trees, and assemble some of the materials which they'll need to offer to the Buddha and to begin the preparations for making the talismans, making some of the fires, and doing all the things. And in order to even begin doing these preparations, they have to refrain from eating meat, fish, and also fragrant foods such as garlic and onions, things like that. It's a very strict purification process that these local families do to make this happen. Buddhism in Japan, like other countries, has a lot of unique aspects to it. One of it is called the danka system. Now, a danka is like, you might say, a parishioner or a member of a certain temple, and it dates back to the feudal period, but I don't need to get into all the details with that. Basically, though, being the danka of a temple ties you to it. Now, this temple, for all its age, is from a really small village and has only 10 families of these danka-san, as they're called. And each one of these families has a huge responsibility to be part of the preparation for these festivals, and they have taken it upon themselves for countless generations to make this festival happen. Now, however, like a lot of areas in Japan, the population is decreasing, the average age is incredibly high, and a lot of young people are moving to the cities, or in some cases, people just didn't have kids. Of these 10 families around the Kokusekiji festival, less than half of them have young people living there ready to take on their responsibilities, to continue doing all of this work. And the age of the men doing it now is over 70, I believe, on average, perhaps closer to 75. So because of the increasing age of these families and the lack of young people to take on responsibilities and continue it, it is no longer able to be continued here. This festival is, however, incredibly loved all over Japan. You have people from Kyushu, from Osaka, from all over the country come up to participate in this festival every year. It's been increasingly popular over the last 15 years, and so a lot of people are really, really sad that it is finished, and there is a lot of talk of it being restarted or restored maybe somewhere else nearby here, and to keep as much of it as possible, even if they can't keep all of the traditions. And so I'm hoping that a festival like this can be recreated in the near future so that people can still experience the intensity, the ferocity of this festival. I think that the COVID pandemic also contributed to the festival ending now as opposed to hanging on for another 5 or 6 years. There were 3 years during the peak of the pandemic when the festival was not held, and I think for those people who were putting in all the work to make it happen, having 3 years off and then looking at having to do it all over again, maybe at their age was a little bit overwhelming, and so that maybe was the timing with which they said, yeah, we can't do this anymore. I just bumped into the head monk of this temple today while I was on my way here to film, and had a really nice conversation with him. He's a really friendly, approachable guy. He's youngish. He's just a little bit younger than me. I'd guess he's maybe 5 or 7 years younger than me. And he recently sort of ascended to the role of head monk. And he told me something that really surprised me. See, first, Japanese monks in modern-day Japan usually make most of their income by performing Buddhist rituals. Funerals are pretty expensive in Japan, and when you have a funeral, you pay the monk to come and perform all sorts of things. And so most monks, make their money from funerals and other rituals. And in terms of who hires you, that is your danka-san, your parishioners, the people who are members of your temple. However, as I said, as much as this is a famous ancient temple, it's also small in terms of the number of families that support it. As there are just those 10 families that support it, that's not much work in terms of them hiring him for rituals. And so he has a normal job like other people. He is a Japanese language teacher. He teaches, in fact, in Morioka. It's about an hour away from here, but he goes a few times a week to Morioka to teach Japanese to foreign people like me. He also works for an online school teaching Japanese as well. Now, for now, the Kokusekiji Sominsai is no longer being held, but there are still a number of really epic, intense, similar festivals that are also classified as these Hadaka Matsuri, or Naked Man festivals. One of them is Saitogi, held in Ninohe early in the Lunar New Year. So you'll have to Google what day it's held each year. It shifts as the Lunar New Year does. Now that festival is similar in that people, again, only in Fundoshi, they don't go into a river, but they dump 3 buckets of water over their heads outside in the cold surrounded by snow. They do the same Hadaka Mairi, where they go and pray then after having purified themselves, and they build an enormous pyre, usually a couple meters high, and they take these enormous poles, usually taking 2 people to hold them, these big, wooden tree branches, and they just strike the edge of this enormous pyre, which sends up flames and sparks and affects the smoke. And it's all about the smoke. A Shinto priest, as this one is held at a shrine, not a temple, reads the direction that the smoke billows after being struck by all these men, and predicts the coming rice harvest in that season. So that's one. Another is in Hiraizumi, actually fairly close to Kokusekiji, not too far away, and that one is called Hatsukayasai. It's held several nights, I believe from January 14th all the way through the climax on the last night on the 20th night, Hatsukayasai, January 20th. And that one also has these men wearing, not fundoshi, sarashi in this case, it's very similar, very little with torches, and they also have this fight for the somin bukuro, that sacred bag of wood chips at the very end of it. And truth be told, I've actually participated in both Saitogi, that one where we're banging on the huge pyre for the smoke, and Hatsukayasai in Hiraizumi. And I really enjoyed both of them. Because I was participating in them, I was unable to film any of it, but some photos exist of me doing that, and it was quite the experience. I intend to do it again, hopefully next year. Of course, there are more festivals than just these Hadaka Matsuri up in the wintertime in Iwate. There are harvest festivals, summer festivals. Japan is a country of Matsuri, these festivals, and they are one of my favorite aspects of Japanese culture. They are just so diverse really, but also generally intense, sometimes peaceful. They're every different thing that you can imagine. So even when I want to throw all these adjectives at the festivals, there are others that are utterly the opposite. Some of them are quiet, peaceful, mysterious. Others are intense and masculine and just nuts. And so they are everything. And I hope that when you're visiting Japan, you first take the time to Google where you're going and see if there are any regional festivals being held in the areas you're planning to visit during that period. And if there are, it's really worth the effort to go and see them. And in some cases, like the festivals up here in northern Japan, you may help by coming. I've talked with some of the people to the Ninohe Saitogi, for example, and they said that if more foreigners came and visited, and it came to be something that actually attracted tourists and thus contributed to the economy, it would help in the preservation of the festival, and it would make it more likely to last longer, even in the face of decreasing populations. So there are all kinds of undiscovered local festivals that are just waiting for your discovery. It might involve renting a car to get out there or staying out late at night, but I hope you get a chance to do it. It's so much fun and so interesting. As you may know, I'm a local guide, so if you're interested in having me take you around any area of northern Japan in Iwate or Akita, centered around Morioka, please hit me up. How to do that is all in the video description. I would love to share the best parts of northern Japan with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the trails.